Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. It's another just beautiful day in the upper Midwest, and I'm happy. I got my ballot. I filled it out. I sent it in. I voted, and I could not be happier. I have a great show for you today. But look, here we are. After all that, it's now up to us. You know, and I did my share, but it's up to us. We have endured four more years of Republican Party captivity. The former Conservative Party, now transformed into a radical cult, abandoned American greatness and embraced its new role as handmaiden to a would-be tyrant. The brave amongst them are cast out. From its remnants, we get abortion bans, book bans, and the abuse of state power to silence those who will not fall in line. The party of Abe Lincoln is now the party seeking to make sure a government of the people, by the people, and for the people will now perish from the earth. That is not hyperbole. For 4 years, we've listened to them whine about reality. Truth to them is as sunlight is to vampires. They shun it. We have been forced to listen to them tell us that they won when they lost. We've been forced to hear them describe felons who attack police with bear spray and flagpoles as political prisoners. We've listened to them portray January 6th as a tourist visit when it was a violent insurrection. For 4 years, we've been forced to watch helplessly as a captured and corrupt Supreme Court eroded the guardrails protecting democracy. They made presidents above the law. They shut the doors of the judiciary to gerrymandering cases, and they legalized political bribery. They ignored the 14th Amendment when it applied to Donald Trump and enforced it when it applied to everyone else. And they stole away the right of every woman to control her own body. For 4 years, we have heard these Republicans threaten us, promising all manner of retribution when they retake power. We've heard them promise to throw millions out of the country. We've heard Donald Trump and his fawning running mate call people who are here legally illegals, and then invent a story that these folks are stealing and eating pets. Seriously? We've heard them say Jews are to blame if they lose. We've heard them say that our borders are open, our government is destroying the nation, and our economy is in ruins. All lies. Thankfully, though you would barely know it from our cowed media, that's not all these last 4 years have been about. You know, I mean, Mr. Trump, who wants us to believe in common sense rather than experts, his common sense told us to drink bleach as a cure to COVID-19. His mishandling of that pandemic led to tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. He didn't care. But you know who did? Joe Biden. And when Joe took office, he took action. He organized a massive effort to vaccinate Americans and tame the virus. Now, even before COVID hit us, under Trump's leadership, the nation was in a manufacturing recession. And during the pandemic, the economy actually crashed. Millions were out of work. Supply chains failed. As president, Mr. Trump was a champion of blame. The virus was China's fault. Its persistence was science's fault. What he never championed was our recovery. Who did? Joe Biden. And look, with help from a Democratic Congress and his Vice President, Kamala Harris, Biden rebuilt the American economy. On his watch, ours became the fastest growing, largest economy in the world. On his watch, for the first time in decades, Ordinary Americans began to benefit from that growth. On his watch, more Americans are working, inflation is down, crime is down, investment in American manufacturing is at record levels, infrastructure is getting repaired, and yes, even illegal border crossings are down. We are better off now than we were 4 years ago. In fact, we are better off now than we were before the pandemic. These past 4 years have also seen the U.S. lead the world through some of our biggest challenges. Top of the list, climate change. Mr. Trump actually told oil execs that for $1 billion, he would end efforts to transition to clean fuels. But under Joe Biden, America is now leading the world in its efforts to invest and build an economy based on clean energy. This is a massive achievement. And then there are the old threats. Russia's invasion of Europe, an invasion made far more likely by the weakening of our allies under Mr. Trump and his cozy relations with Mr. Putin. This is the first military invasion since World War II. The growing push by China to militarize the South China Sea, the explosion of ancient hatreds in the Middle East. Against each of these threats, during the past 4 years, we have seen increased American leadership, smart leadership, in the form of stronger and more strategic alliances, the use of military assets, including selling weapons with conditions attached to the sale. Look, it's a dangerous world, and our adversaries, they're just as smart as we are, and yet, because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Americans are not themselves at war for the first time in a generation. Thank God. And because of their leadership, Ukraine still stands. China is an adversary, but not an enemy. And the Middle East, despite the unconscionable slaughter, the unconscionable terrorism, despite all that stuff that's unconscionable, they're on a path they could finally have at least a lasting peace if they're willing to take it. Look, it has been the longest 4 years. Heck, Joe Biden was a young man 4 years ago. That's how long ago it was. But now it's up to us. Will all those lies matter than all that good work? I hope the good work matters more, but it's up to us. Kamala Harris has been part of all our successes and will continue to move us forward. Donald Trump, he's been the author of all those lies and can only move us backwards. It's up to us. America and the world stand on a knife's edge. Will freedom and democracy continue to light humanity's path, sort of America's destiny, or will we surrender to rulers who will impose their order from above? It's up to us. Well, no, actually, it's up to you. What will you do now that voting is underway? What will you do today, tomorrow, the next day? Will you vote as soon as you can? Will you join efforts to get out the rest of the vote? Will you stand up and counter lies with facts until every last vote is counted? And then will you help put a rapid end to the virus of Trumpism as we did with the deadly phase of COVID after the last election? You know what? Of course you will. We're going to take a break, and the incomparable A.B. Stoddard joins me when I come back. You're going to want to hear every word.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
A.B. Stoddard is back with us. She is, of course, the very wise, very well-sourced columnist for The Bulwark. And we have been in just a fabulous discussion for, 2.5 years, 3 years maybe. A.B., welcome back.
It's great to be with you, Edwin. Thank you.
I don't know if you remember this, but the last time you were on this show, Joe Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee. And just a few hours after we spoke, a gunman shot at Donald Trump during that rally in Pennsylvania, killing that volunteer firefighter trying to protect his family. I mean, it isn't just the politics that we've been watching. America's been through a lot in a short time.
Yeah, it's incredible. And really thank God that these attempts on Donald Trump's life have not succeeded. That was really scary. I remember that day. It was July 13th, I think. Anyway, and it's just also really a blessing that Joe Biden had an early debate and ended up having to step aside and being willing to do so, so that we have a real shot at defeating Donald Trump on November 5, because all of the polling back then was showing, an easy defeat of Joe Biden by Donald Trump.
You had long thought Joe Biden was, for all the good he accomplished, was frankly too old to be a successful nominee. And you thought that long before that debate. You told me that. And then, quite suddenly after the debate, I think the Democrats agreed with you. And then Joe agreed with you. And what followed was this national outbreak of happiness. And then we returned to the slog, right? And then there was that debate with Kamala and Trump. And we had another sort of mini outbreak of happiness because, it was so lopsided. But the world we live in does not allow these happiness moments to last, I guess. And it's back to the slog. I'm curious a little bit, not just about the politics, maybe, but about your own sort of emotional journey during the time you last spoke.
Yeah, it's, I can remember, first of all, the interregnum was very painful. I was very upset at Joe Biden's family for letting him go out on the debate stage and do that to himself. I am a fan of Joe Biden's, as I've said on your show many times. Yep. I have covered him in the Senate, and I didn't like the ending of his candidacy at all. So those intervening 3 weeks, I think, were really tough to see people leaking on Joe Biden, because he had a very stubborn inner circle that was protective of him, but people were starting, the calls were coming from inside the House. It was ugly. And I think Nancy Pelosi did what she had to do. I think she did the right thing, but that was painful. And that time was very, the debate was traumatic. And then those 3.5 weeks afterwards were really tough. I was very nervous about Harris's candidacy. The handoff was then quick and seamless, and she absolutely just bolted from the gate with what I really view as the most unified and smart and shrewd and strategic campaign that is so much better than any of us expected. People put aside their differences, the Obama camps, the Biden camps, the whatever. Everyone in the party came together to quickly not behind her, but then also expand the coalition as quickly as possible, to welcome Republicans to the convention, to pursue Liz Cheney, everything they needed to do to quiet progressives, to whatever they had to do, they did it. And it was absolutely remarkable. And I think she's run a really great campaign. And so I was just exuberant in those early days, as you were, watching it all unfold. It was so impressive. Watching the response in the country, a big number of double haters who were dreading the rematch between Biden and Trump come right around to her. And this amazing outpouring of support with money and organizing and volunteer and grassroots events, and it was really, so obviously we were all high in relief, and it was really exciting to see how the country reacts when they see tomorrow, right? When they see the future. And it was real. And we have to remember that, Edwin. It was real. So, yes, now we're in the slog. The ballot test remains essentially tied because she has an electoral college disadvantage. He has a electoral college advantage that that puts more pressure on her to win a much bigger popular vote margin in order to secure the wins in the swing states that she needs to win the election. And that's that's too close for comfort. But I think that you would probably rather be the Harris than Trump. If you look at the numbers and the things that are going on, but it's very, very tight. And because a Trump victory is so existential, it's very unnerving. So I'm back to being very nervous.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me back up to that post-debate interregnum that you talked about. I agree with you that it was gut-wrenching and painful. And then I thought, my God, the timing couldn't have been better. If Joe Biden had stepped out before the Republican convention, the Republicans might have had a different convention. Instead, they had the convention they had, which, was not particularly successful as conventions go and full of stuff that, our side can campaign against. And then he waited long enough because I know my fellow Democrats, if we had more time, we'd have screwed it up.
Yeah.
I mean, the timing just turned out to be perfect. Not enough time for the Republicans to figure it out, and not so much time that we Democrats would mess it up. I think we got very lucky in that. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the double haters, and we talked about them before. Let's talk about what happened to them. But are they still the folks to watch, or is the fate of the nation now in other hands?
So interesting. I mean, there's so many factors on the table, right? First of all, there's just volatility. We have another hurricane, that's devastated a big portion of the country, and with hurricanes likely more on the way. We have, thank God the dock workers strike was resolved for now. And then, we have this really scary escalation in the Middle East. So that's never good in the final weeks and can be a factor. But yes, I think these final holdouts, Edwin, I mean, there's just the people who wanted to vote for third party. That number's down. The double haters are down. But those people are the people who are still on the fence are the most pessimistic. They're mad about inflation. They don't trust either party. They're obviously not politically engaged. They're not tribal partisans. But yeah, it could make a difference if they showed up for one or the other candidate, for sure. And then I do think that the parties are going to have to mobilize, right? I think that Harris has made it clear that she was in the persuasion business. And I really, really have been so impressed at her effort to reach out to the center, to say, I know that a chaotic border scares you. And I take this seriously. I would sign the Langford bill. This is what I've done in my career before being vice president, with prosecuting drug cartels, human traffickers, et cetera. Talking the other night after Liz Cheney spoke at the endorsement event in Wisconsin about Ukraine. That was the one policy issue that she brought up. In an event that was designed to show the center of the electorate, like, I am not a radical. Liz Cheney is here vouching for me. This is the kind of campaign, this kind of president I want to be. So I think that she's done a lot of persuasion. Also on cost reduction. Very smart campaign. Speaking of people hard hit by inflation, saying, basically, in essence, Joe Biden, the president told you that the economy is better than you think and feel. I'm telling you, I know it feels like shit. And, costs are too high and prices are too high and we have to lower them. And that's been very, very smart of her. So she did all she could to persuade in August and September. And I think now she has to mobilize. They have to, on the ground, mechanically, with their vast resources, get people out to vote. But they really need to, they need to start scaring people about Trump. So I think it's in that messaging that you can sort of scrape out. You get at those undecideds and you just shame them. If they're not going to vote for Harris, you want to make sure they don't vote for Trump. So
let me ask the question with more fine detail. Are we now it's a question of getting the holdouts, the ones who are still on the fence, or is this really just now, since we've started to vote, only a turnout election? That should we now focus entirely on turnout?
Well, again, I do think she has the resources and the message already to turn out her base. But again, I put it with Bill Kristol this week, bluntly. Look, the ads in the swing states, Edwin, as you know, are all about these criminal migrants who are going to come into your kitchen and cut your throat, as Trump said at a rally last week. They're all fear-based. And so I think that in terms of get out the vote plans, how you make sure that your voters, my mother, for instance, she's 82 years old, she's in Connecticut. She and her friends have done 2,000 postcards from Michigan, 2,000 for Georgia, 2,000, for Florida. Right? You're trying to get people to actually figure out their vote plan and vote. But I think the late messaging needs to use fear. I think it has to be about abortion and the dystopian hellscape that Republicans want, especially in some of these, red state legislatures, and that you can't trust Trump on the issue. You have to do it about January 6th and democracy, about the fact that he's laying the groundwork again to try to contest the election results if she wins and steal it. And you just have to scare people about Trump. So it's like, yeah, you mobilize your base, but also with messages that I think and hope can reach the holdouts. And that's about how Trump is unfit.
Well, I'm going to come back to that in just a second with you. But before we get to that message, a bit about turnout. I'm comforted by the field operation that Democrats have put together in a lot of states, but including most of the swing states. They've paid attention to it. They've worked on it for a long time. The sort of expertise honed up in my part of the world, in Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota, where they've really built first-rate state parties. These guys, those party chairs have been, running master classes. So you got now North Carolina with that is like from nothing built a pretty strong organization in very little time. Arizona's done better than they've done in the past. So, and on the other side, Trump defunded his field operation in order to go into a sort of a legal operation to challenge votes. So I take some confidence that we will turn out our voters the old-fashioned way, and we're going to be better at it than we've been in the past. I wonder, do you think I'm in fantasy land?
No, I think that I agree with you. Their state parties are a wreck. Democrats have a good operation. You've got Fluff, overseeing this kind of bring out the base operation, and they have extraordinary amount of money. The most a candidate has ever raised. So that's comforting. As you said, the Trump campaign has really injured their ground game in order to pay legal bills months ago, and then now in the final months to do this election integrity thing where they're just going to send people to polling places to intimidate people, and they're spending money on lawyers trying to challenge everything. So that is a disparity, to be sure. I am worried about the registration numbers in some places, the party identity numbers. Gallup had findings out a few days ago about how the election favors Republicans because of party affiliation, and that's long been predictive of the outcome. And the issues favor Republicans, and so I am going to be absolutely petrified until the bitter end. I don't care how many polls I see. I don't care how many early vote numbers I see. I'm always going to be scared of what's invisible to us, which is the secret Trump vote, the polling errors, the ads in swing states, that are scaring suburban moms who might vote Democrat, but they're really hoping they can scare them. So I'm, the polling errors in 2020 were really bad. People forget that. But, some of them had Biden up 8 or 10. And he squeaks by in these states by 20,000, 50,000, 10,000 votes.
Yep.
So I'm good and scared. There's no question. I just have to hope that there is, that women are going to save us. Yeah. That women are going to save us. I mean, I really, in the end, right? That's if she pulls out a nice victory, we know why. And I'm really hoping that's going to be the case. And I know there's a secret Harris vote, Edwin. I know it. I know there are men in the law enforcement community, veterans community, who are in very, very Trumpy circles who will never admit it to their friends and their family members who are ready to just want to move on from this. But there's a secret Trump vote too. So I can easily, I can tell myself, oh, Liz Cheney and the Republican voters against Trump, everything my publisher Sarah Longwell's doing, there is going to be such great shame brought to bear on these Republicans who know better. This is wrong, and we can shame them into voting for Harris secretly when the curtain's drawn, or we can shame them into not filling out the top of the ticket. And I get so inspired, by the righteousness of our cause, and then I panic about people who. I know I'm going in circles here, but this is how I'm no longer coherent because I'm like you, I'm emotionally invested. But then I go right back to people who are just willing to join Trump now for the first time since 2020. I mean, he tried to steal an election, overthrow the government, and now they're for Trump. It just makes me baggy.
So on the topic of Trump, I read Jack Smith's recent filing, and I got so angry. And then I remembered that 147 Republicans voted to overturn the election based on this conspiracy, and they're at it again. And I know smart people say that democracy isn't an issue people care about. But really, I mean, this, I know it's like had 4 minutes of coverage in the New York Times, but the New York Times happily isn't, the only thing that matters. It's going to get more play throughout the campaign. This scary stuff you're talking about, there's plenty to pull from in that. There's plenty to pull from in the lies he's telling that are killing people around this hurricane. I don't think he helped himself with, him and J.D. Vance talking about eating animals, eating pets. I mean, at some point, don't Americans just say, okay, the sun is out, and if he says it's dark, you can actually go out and see for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Springfield episode, thankfully, was early enough. I'm afraid that a lot of people will not learn that they're lying about the storm and FEMA, but the Springfield thing really made them famous, right? That was like a disaster. And it went everywhere. And I think, again, if it's not going to sway a Trump voter, but someone who wants to vote Republican is talking to themselves in circles about how they can't support a Democrat. That's the kind of thing that's just really deeply offensive and so wrong. And even though Mike DeWine wants to spend several days with Jonathan Martin from Politico and angst about it and complain about it and write a New York Times op-ed about it, of course, he still has to vote for the Republican ticket. That doesn't mean that voters do. And again, I think shaming Republican voters is a huge factor in this election, right? Post January 6th. You know better, and Paul Ryan of Wisconsin can say that he's going to write Ronald Reagan in or whoever he says he's going to write in. But I know he's, of course he's going to vote for Harris when the curtain's drawn. It's Wisconsin, it's swing state. He doesn't want Trump to win. So I have to hope there are more, people like that. That look at the Springfield thing and just, or just that their anger is growing.
I just don't know how they can pull off a late surprise because the credibility is so terrible. I mean, the Springfield thing followed that offensive, pretend I was invited to be graveside at Arlington Cemetery, right? Which also backfired on them. I mean, America has seen time after time after time after time. Whenever they open their mouth, they're lying. And so I don't know how they get away with whatever their surprise is.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think at this point, I remember talking to you when Biden was the candidate before the debate, saying, back when it was tight enough, saying, I feel like, the election could go a win either way by several points, right? Like swing within this, Now I think it's either Trump wins a close election and just ekes it out, or Harris ekes it out, or Harris wins a nice buffer, a nice victory. But I don't think that we're going to see Trump take the lead in October. I mean, I don't think there's anything, right? His negatives are so stubborn. There's such a built-in, baked-in 46 to 49% of the country that can't stand him. So I don't think that it grows. But he can eke out a victory because he almost did in 2020 by 44,000 votes in 3 states. So he can definitely win, but I don't think that he's going to, that the momentum is going to shift in his favor this month. I don't see that happening at all. Yeah. It would be a white knuckle till the end.
Yeah, but he's not the same guy he was in 2020. He's just, as creative as he is as a liar and a politician, it's just he doesn't have it anymore. It's an old act, and people are tired of it.
It's so stale.
Yeah.
It's so stale. The caravan is really stale, and then Springfield didn't help it. I'm concerned about misinformation about the storm, like I said, and Elon and Putin helping him, and misinformation is a powerful thing. But I'm really hoping. I wrote a few days ago about momentum. I think that if she can get the momentum back, which she had in August and it stalled in September, and, Bruce Springsteen and Magic Johnson and the Obamas and whatever it takes to get some momentum going, I think there's a possibility that she can break out this month.
Yeah, I do too.
In polling and then, with late deciders, that kind of thing.
Well, there'll be no honest polling. I mean, we've already seen, as we saw with the red wave, a whole bunch of junk polls that are, showing up to bend the averages for everybody. So, if you're listening, don't pay any attention to polls at all between now and the election, the ones you love or the ones you hate. Right, we're past polling being useful. All this talk about non-citizens voting, it's all lies, but it does undermine confidence in the elections, and it's coordinated. And maybe where the idea came from and who told everybody to do it. But I mean, hunting improper registrations in Alabama is not because the Republicans in Alabama think Dems are going to win the state. They're only doing it so that folks there won't trust results everywhere else. I mean, where does this poison come from, and how is it so universally followed as a GOP script?
It's so interesting because if you really sit down and think about it for a few minutes, you think if you're an illegal immigrant in this country, you're not just gratuitously doing things like voting and taking. Voting illegally and taking a risk that could get you caught. I mean, that's just not what you're doing. you're trying to keep your head down and you're trying to stay off the radar. So that's like just crazy right there as a concept. But you know, the immigration thing is a potent issue for Republicans, and it's an easy out that he's been using since 2016. I mean, he won the election and still said that he would have won California except for illegal voting, because you can't fill the hole in his sociopathic heart, as you know. So even when he won, he said that there were illegals voting. So that's he's going to do that, and the Republicans in the House are going to back him up because they all have to. I mean, Republicans everywhere will, but you know, a couple of weeks ago they were trying to help him out with a bill to make it illegal, even though it's already illegal, because that's what they do to make him feel good. And he's going to do that, and he's going to. You know, the most important thing is for people to be aware and start having a discussion about the fact that he is not going to accept a Harris victory, and that they will refuse to certify. Radicalized Republicans on the ground will refuse to certify the election at the local level because they're going to try to cast doubt and create delay on a Harris victory, so they can impede state certification and then national certification, because that's what Trump wants. And so if you talk about this line of theirs, illegals are voting, and it's, you know, you can't trust the elections. What we have to do is have a conversation about trusting the process at the local level, and why you are forced to certify when the votes come in at the county level, whether you like it or not, because any discrepancies about ballots have to be taken care of later in the auditing and recount processes and in court, and that it is not up to some Trumper at a local canvassing board at the county level to slow the certification process within days of the election. And that is a real threat, and it's a really serious problem in terms of what delays could do to throw us into a constitutional crisis. And we need to raise awareness among voters that this is their plan, and that some Trump are doing this at the county level does not mean that there was a problem with the count or with the ballot.
Yeah,
so I think that's like a fatal alarm fire that is coming right at us, and people need to know.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, just so we're clear, right, is that they will try to cheat. And we have to, and they tried to steal an election 4 years ago, and they're still trying. You know, shame on our justice system for not dealing with this faster. But here we are. And I want, us Democrats to get a little tougher and a little, and to make maybe take a page from the other guy's book here. But I'm hoping Joe Biden will say, hey, you know what? Any official act of mine is immunized forever. And if I find that you guys are messing with the ballot box, I am sending Navy SEAL Team 6 to cut your knees off.
Yeah, I would love. I mean, I was really glad that he came to the briefing room yesterday and said that he was sure that the election would be free and fair, but he wasn't sure about how Trump would respond to it, and he was worried about violence. I was really glad that he put that into the system, into the conversation. And, you're right. He should throw around some talk about his broad presidential immunity, and really, he's leaving. I mean, I hope he goes. I hope he pulls out all the guns, because the more we talk about this, and the more that we explain to people in advance, this is what they're going to do. They're not allowed to do it. Certification at your county level is ministerial, and it is not discretionary. It is mandatory. It is perfunctory. It's never been challenged before.
No.
This is a way that they can please Trump, and they can do it in a Trump county. They don't even have to do it in a swing county. They can do it in a county where all the votes are coming in for Trump. They can say, we think we have a problem here, just so they can slow down the state count. And if we make them famous, right? If we talk about this in advance, then
Maybe
people won't. Then I think there's like less chance, right, that we have violence and mayhem.
Yep. And we owe them this. We owe them this. Look, there are hundreds of people in jail now because they listened to Donald Trump say, "You're doing the right thing," when they were doing the wrong thing. But what they didn't hear from us in advance is, if you listen to that man and you go down this path, you are going to spend the rest of your time in jail. You will not see your children grow up. And I mean, we owe it to tell them that we are as tough as they think they are, and they're not going to get away with it.
Right, that we see it coming, and everybody knows what the plan is. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the problem is that they think they're going to get on Trump's plane and get a Trump watch, and that they've got this great plan, and it could be a long, painful slog with many lawsuits, Edwin. But I just feel like more Americans are prepared. Americans let Trump's lies roll off them now after all these years, and I'd like them to do the same with this BS about the elections. And it's going to take all of us these last weeks, right, to talk about it. And I know Harris won't. I know she won't talk about it, and I get that. Which is why everybody else has to do it. All her surrogates, the Obamas, the Clintons, right? Everybody has to talk about this.
All the time.
And has to make these freaks in Georgia particularly famous. That's the key state where they're going to try to steal it.
Yeah, I mean, that's in court right now, this question of whether they have the right to break open the ballot boxes, as Brad Raffensperger said that law allowed them to do. And I think in Georgia, the courts will not let them hand count everything. But, weirder things have happened.
Right. But I think that they still have Republicans determined at the local level to say there's something wrong, even if they can't hand count them. There's something wrong, and I'm just going to delay certification and I want an investigation.
In my dream, we win without Georgia. We win enough states so Georgia doesn't matter, and then Georgia's votes don't count, and we will see an entire state disenfranchised because of these people.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll wake people up.
I want to know what states you feel good about and which ones you're nervous about.
I feel good about Wisconsin. I am anxious about Michigan, though I think I feel good about Michigan, but I'm anxious about it. I would put Pennsylvania in the I'm nervous category, but maybe that's because I don't know it as well. I'm worried about Arizona. I am optimistic about North Carolina.
Right.
I mean, the storm, the people on the ground in the storm know BS when they hear it, and it's affecting their lives. So I felt good about it, and now I feel better about it. I wish they didn't have to go through this tragedy, but. Donald Trump threw toilet paper at people in Puerto Rico when they had a hurricane. You going to trust him?
Yeah.
I have friends in Montana who tell me I should not despair about John Tester. I think they're wrong. I love John Tester. I think they're probably wrong, but they tell me that after that last debate, that the ground has shifted a little his way. Boy, I hope that's true.
Okay, but for Harris, for the Electoral College, Senate races aside, for Harris for the Electoral College, I think we're feeling good about Nevada. You're feeling good about Wisconsin. We're feeling good about North Carolina, and then we're worried about Michigan and Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. So we feel good about 3 states and wobbly about 4.
Yeah, right? But again, I don't know if I'm right about Pennsylvania. It's just further away, and I'm not paying as close attention.
I don't think any of us should feel good about Pennsylvania because it's like half the electorate there is white non-college. So we're not going to feel good about Pennsylvania until we hear that she won it. Okay, right?
Okay, that's clear. And in Michigan, I have a lot of confidence in both the Democratic Party leadership, but also, they've done very well there in electing statewide.
Of course.
But the stuff in the Middle East hurts them, no question.
But that's 3% of the electorate in Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. Maybe progressives there are another. Okay, you're right. It's the Muslim and Arab Americans, 3% of the Michigan electorate, and then you have some pissed off progressives. I get it. But he won it by like 154,000 votes. Biden did, and they have like a trifecta there, and they did so well in 22 and 20. I think 23, right? Anyway.
And Lavora Barnes, who's the state chair, is one of the most sort of remarkable women at telling people for years, look, you're interested in your community or you care about this, here's an on-ramp for you to get involved. And so she had it prepared, so when all those people raised their hands in that period of glee, she found things for them to do. And while I'm anxious about it, I would never put it right now in the blue category, in the red category. Sorry.
Okay, so right. Okay, so Michigan's like in the middle. We have 3 that we're feeling pretty okay about. Michigan's sort of in the middle, and then we're going to be wobbly about Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. I'm very nervous about Arizona. I didn't want to be. I thought Republicans in Maricopa County, there's so many Mormons, and they're still in the John McCain, Jeff Flake tradition. Republicans there voted for Katie Hobbs for governor. They voted for Mark Kelly. They don't like Trump, and they don't like Carrie Lake. And I really wanted to believe it, but there's a lot of Gallego Trump voters. Gallego and Trump are winning independents now in Arizona. So that's a nervous-making situation. It's just going to come down to how many people will put their tickets there.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with that. And, turnout and motivation.
Yeah, and I thought there was a bunch of Republicans in Georgia who, they voted for Warnock and Kemp and that they didn't like Trump. And I don't know. I just want to believe that they still don't like him. But I don't know.
What would make you decide you like him? I mean, seriously, what has he done that's likable in the last 4 years?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and, the New York Times reported recently there's 850,000 Black Georgia residents who did not vote. I don't know if they're voters, but they didn't vote in 2020.
I got to ask you before we go, just to take a second on this strange vice presidential debate we had. Here's what I think, and I didn't think it in the moment, but a couple days later, here's what I think. Tim Walz probably won the debate by being a decent guy who looked genuinely nervous, like deer in the headlights nervous at the start of the debate, while the other guy looked like he was selling me a car and everybody knew he was lying. And people like me, after the debate, were like, what the hell? I mean, I could think about 10 things I would have said in response to Vance, including, I'm sorry, he tried to save Obamacare, right?
No, there was like 15 things he missed that he didn't do. Yeah.
And yet, a couple days later, because of the terrible things like I'm not going to say Trump lost the last election. What the media did, what social media did after the debate, I think Tim Walz, by being a nice guy, even if he just seemed like I don't do political debates and I'm not good at them, I think that at the end of the day, on balance, was more helpful than not.
Right. So I agree with you. I think A, it doesn't matter, and B, Tim Walz appealed to the folks. I mean, if you look at the snap polls overnight, they gave him better numbers on reasonable, better numbers on prepared, better numbers on a bunch of the policy issues, except for the economy and immigration, on which he was only bested by Vance by like a couple of points.
Yep.
So people responded to plain spoken Tim Walz, and they were not sitting there knowing all of the issues and all the facts like you and I do, knowing that he was missing opportunities, huge opportunities that he left on the table.
Totally right.
I mean, January 6th, the fact that Tim Walz and Margaret Brennan and Nora O'Donnell did not turn to J.D. Vance and say, you have spoken with great gusto about how you would not have done what Mike Pence did, and you wanted to open up the Congress to debate a different set of electors, basically fake electors, to throw open a decided election in defiance of the will of the people, a debate that would have thrown us into a constitutional crisis. That you've said that a couple months ago on CNN. And also that a president doesn't have to obey a Supreme Court ruling. So the fact that J.D. Vance got to walk off that stage without having to answer that is a crime, because it's completely disqualifying what he said months ago. Absolutely. Completely and utterly disqualifying. And then there were other things, and I could go on. But I understand why. What I wanted Walz to do was to walk out and say, I'm a high school coach turned governor of a Midwestern state. I'm really proud of my life, of my career, my accomplishments, but I'm a terrible debater. And what you're going to see tonight is a great debate from J.D. Vance, who's a Yale Law School trained lawyer. But even he will never come close to putting a performance tonight in the next 90 minutes like the performance that the vice president gave when she wiped the floor with Donald Trump. And if Walz had just said that from the get-go, right?
Yeah, it would have been fun.
We would have been in safer territory.
Yep.
But yeah, and look, I couldn't put in a presidential or vice presidential debate performance either. I'm not saying I could have done any better than Walz. I was just frustrated because you and I follow this at the granular level at the things he left unsaid.
Yeah. All right, well, here we go. Voting is underway. I've already voted. The election is on. I mean, you and I have been talking about this. Will people show up? Who's going to show up? Are they going to show up motivated? Who's more motivated? The map seems to be shifting into the last minute. What would you suggest people do in the next couple of days, weeks?
I mean, this is just my personal preference is, I really feel that people should be talking to anyone they can in their life about the kind of system that we have, and that, it doesn't matter whether you agree with Harris on policy, that if Donald Trump is elected and rewarded with 4 more years of power, or who knows how many years of power, after trying to overthrow our government, there is nothing he won't try. There is nothing that will stop him from his corrupt goals and his criminal acts for power and money and retribution. There is nothing he won't do. And that's the way that I feel, Edwin. That to me is all that matters. It is the only reason to vote, and it's every reason to vote. And I just, everything else takes a backseat in my view.
I agree with that completely. And my counsel to people is the same as yours, and also pay no more attention to any news that shows up in the next month. Whatever it is, it has potential to be nonsense. Pay no attention. You know everything you need to know today. Nothing
that's wise advice.
Is going to be true, and so pay no attention to it. Just do what you know is right now.
Yeah. And choose our system.
Oh, it's so great to catch up.
And thank you for having me. And I'll see you on the other side, I guess.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Stay
Thank you so much. Take good care.
Bye. All right, we're going to take a break for the news. And when we come back, we have to go to North Carolina and talk about what's happened there. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Billy Ball is editor of North Carolina's Cardinal Pine. It's an independent and important news organization in that state. Its mission includes getting good information to people who, they don't pay for subscriptions, so they're vulnerable to fake news. Billy, thank you for joining me. And first and foremost, I hope you and your family came through this storm okay.
Thank you so much, Edwin. I'm really happy to be here. And for what it's worth, I'm out of central North Carolina. We got off pretty lucky considering how things turned out in western North Carolina. So we're all good. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. But the state has suffered, I think, more than we may yet know. What are you seeing on the ground?
So let me just say that I'm not personally out on the ground there in western North Carolina, but one of our team members is. But here's what I understand is happening from reporters I trust who are also there and from folks who are on the ground. The situation is heartbreaking, and I don't think there's any other way to put it. This is an area of North Carolina that is not accustomed to hurricane damage, and you can't be more clear about that. Where I'm from in eastern North Carolina, they get hurricane damage all the time because we're on the coast. So it's unusual for a storm like this to come in and do this kind of damage inland. But this was kind of they talk about a perfect storm. This was a perfect storm for western North Carolina because it is an area that is very rugged. It has hills and valleys. It has a lot of rivers that are key waterways in that area. And those rivers were heavily swollen already. They'd received a record amount of rain in the days before the storm even got there. So it was shaping up for this worst case scenario with the flooding and the mudslides, and it's just heartbreaking. We haven't found all the folks that we've lost out there, but for the people who are surviving, I think it's probably a very sad situation. It's probably a frustrating situation because it's also really hard to reach people. The roads were heavily damaged. So you got people out there trying to clear roads as quickly as possible to get crucial things to people who need it right now. So, like I said, it's just heartbreaking.
So we have the roads that are still impassable, and I understand power is still out in places. Water is a problem in places. I'm sure it's hard to get food into places. This is really, every day that goes by it makes it more dire.
It's of all the things that I know are the most desperate, I know water is maybe the biggest one. Just getting potable water to people right now is a desperate situation. As we mentioned, it's made worse by the damage to the roads, because I mentioned those mudslides, the flooding. These are areas that, quite frankly, it can be tricky to get to even in the best weather. They are winding in and out of mountains, and it's beautiful, but it can be a little bit tricky to get cars and a lot of vehicles through there anyway. And this is the opposite of the best of circumstances. So it's just, getting it to people who desperately need it. And what we're seeing out here is an incredible, we've seen the response from the state and federal government. We're also seeing an incredible response just from neighbors helping neighbors. And we shared a video at Cardinal Pine of folks delivering insulin on the backs of mules up a mountain in Black Mountain. They're doing anything they can to help their neighbors. And if not for all the misinformation from Donald Trump and his folks, it might be the most positive story, the most positive lining that you could imagine out of this terrible tragedy. But of course, there's been a terrible amount of misinformation that's out there as well about the situation.
So let's talk about that, because Mr. Trump and Elon Musk, they've tried to characterize the federal response and the President Biden's response in ways I don't actually want to repeat. And others, Republicans in Congress, are saying that we gave away the FEMA money to house immigrants. Those weren't exactly their words. I'm not going to use their words. They were too vile. What are the facts about the federal response, the coordination of that response between the various governments, the federal government and the local governments, and the adequacy of funding?
One thing I want to acknowledge first is that for people who are there experiencing it and waiting for water and waiting for food, the response when people can't get to you up a road it probably feels, impossibly slow. But one thing that I've seen and that we've reported on, and that our reporter out there has noted as well, is there was a tremendous amount of speed and dedication from the folks who are out there working. So the Governor Roy Cooper, in advance, we knew this was shaping up to be a really bad situation because of that rain in advance in Western North Carolina that I mentioned before. They knew that this was kind of the worst case scenario. So they were in communication with the White House and the federal government about this ahead of time. The President Biden got a disaster declaration out on Saturday, some hours after the storm had moved out of North Carolina, and we were getting a sense of how bad it was. So they got that, and that was an important procedural step to declare it a disaster. That got FEMA folks moving in. So at that point, we started seeing the state and federal government and local governments and local law enforcement were working together to try to get supplies to people and to try to help people. And so people were out there working, and I acknowledge that if you're on the ground and it's taken some hours and people can't get through the roads, that it probably feels like too long, but it's also, there's a tremendous effort that's happening out there. People working around the clock. Our transportation leader here in North Carolina talked about how his employees had to come from across the state, and they set up a temporary headquarters for them to live in the area to work around the clock just to get those roads cleared. Because that was the most important thing, was getting the roads clear so you can get water up there, so you can get food, so you can get healthcare supplies. So, there's obviously a tremendous amount of work that was going on. And what we're seeing out of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and some of these people on the internet who don't even look like real people, they look like bots, is just, telling people that nothing is happening, that the federal government's not here, or telling people that FEMA's not doing anything, or trying to actually even stop help. It's frankly madness. And it's, for people who are on the ground there, I think we've seen reporters, we've seen local elected officials who are Republicans, by the way, who might in other circumstances be supportive of Donald Trump, who are saying, please stop this misinformation. Please stop sharing this bogus stuff. People's lives are on the line, and we're working to save them. And, Edwin, we can't say a fraction of the misinformation people are sharing out there, because we don't want to give it wings. We don't want to breathe more air into these lies. But they're madness, and they're cruel, and it's all obviously an attempt from Donald Trump's campaign to try to boost himself. And when I said this in a column I recently wrote, you would think people would give it a break, give it a rest on this sort of stuff if people are dying or if they're missing. And we didn't get much time in North Carolina before that sort of partisan hackery sort of swarmed in on us. And I think there's an incredible amount of frustration and sadness from people who are out there, but also frustration that politicians like Donald Trump and his allies are lying about this. Yeah.
I mean, this is the biggest, I guess, storm damage since Katrina. And I remember Katrina, and, it took the National Guard didn't show up with water for anybody for days. The response truly was appalling and slow. And I think the government's learned from that, and the coordination's better, and the response is phenomenal, but it's hard work and difficult. And Katrina, for gosh sakes, was in a city that still had an airport, wasn't in the mountains in a rural place harder to get to.
Absolutely. And people out in this area, I can't stress this enough, are living pretty remote lives out there. Yep. You go up a road and you might pass, 4 or 5 houses for miles, and you're trying to reach people who are up on a steep incline in terrible weather circumstances with a road that isn't functional. It's a worst case scenario, and it's difficult and hard, but it certainly isn't made better by politicians lying about it to boost their election chances. I mean, we've seen the National Guard here for days has been airlifting hundreds of thousands of pounds of supplies in and out of these areas, and it's just, and then you get into all the ridiculousness of Trump's claims that Democrats are not acting because these are red areas. You know, the hardest hit area in western North Carolina was Asheville and Buncombe County, which is one of the bluest spots in North Carolina. It doesn't even make sense what he's saying, and so it's frustrating.
Let's just turn to politics. This terrible disaster is being met with a coordinated and competent response that because of the scope of the disaster is still terribly painful for people. But the response is coordinated, competent, timely, and then you have bad actors lying about it in ways that make it harder to provide aid. I know they think that lying is going to help them in North Carolina, but is it going to help them, or is it hurting Donald Trump because people on the ground know?
I can't see how it's really going to help him in the end, because, like I said, those Republican elected officials who might otherwise be on this guy's side, I don't know what they're thinking in this moment, but we've seen them on social media saying, please stop spreading these lies. I just can't imagine that in the end, lying about this stuff is going to help him there. I'm sure there will be people maybe who are not in the center of it, and maybe people who feel like it has taken too long to get them help. And again, I have empathy for them, because it is so difficult when you're sitting there and you're waiting for help, and you need water and you need medical supplies and food. I have empathy for them, and it makes me sad that I would be very sad to imagine that these people who are hard to communicate with right now, if they get online and they see that Donald Trump's saying that nobody's coming to help them, how desperate that feels, and it's a flat out lie. And there are people, there was a quote from Governor Roy Cooper during his press conference the other day. He said, no matter who or where you are in western North Carolina, we're coming to help you. We are on our way. And we're seeing people who are noticing that. We're seeing journalists who are chest deep in water, who are photographing and documenting this stuff. And it's just a shame that people would use it to try to help their electoral chances. And one thing that I want to add as well, if I may, Edwin, is that, as I mentioned before, it's normally eastern North Carolina and the coast that gets hit really hard with hurricanes. So we've had a lot of experience with hurricanes. And, Hurricane Matthew a few years ago did an incredible amount of damage in eastern North Carolina, flooded areas of the state. It shut down schools, an incredible amount of damage. And I think it's important to point out that I don't know that Trump saying that the federal government is not doing enough is really going to fly in these areas, because we can't forget that after Hurricane Matthew, Donald Trump was president, and he denied North Carolina 99% of the amount of federal aid that was requested by Governor Roy Cooper. And you can go back and find those stories. It was a few $1 million he sent our way with these poor, mostly, and I have to say, rural, mostly black communities that were underwater in eastern North Carolina after Hurricane Matthew. And people are going to say, you weren't there for North Carolina when you were president. And how are we going to buy this idea that you're the avenging hero now when this is happening? And I think I don't think it's going to work, Edwin. I don't think, and people who've been through it, who saw no support from Trump when he was president, I don't think they're going to be fooled by this show.
Yeah. I read, and I don't know if this is true, so I read that there were, deep fakes of people on roofs asking for help, that they need to be rescued. And then people would show up to rescue them, but there was no one there because it was a fake. And, to pulling resources where they don't need to go when they should be somewhere else. Is that stuff really happening?
We have seen a lot of, I haven't heard specifically about the story you're mentioning, Edwin, but I believe it because we've seen a lot of AI-generated bogus images. And some of them are, they are designed to, there was one that was going around that was of this little girl hugging a puppy, and she was like in a boat and she was crying. And my first reaction when I saw it, because I'm used to looking at misinformation, is this is designed to make people feel this big emotion and to share it. And it just was too fake. It was just like, this is too, it's too designed to get a reaction from us. And real life rarely looks exactly like that. So, I saw real journalists sharing it. It was a really, it was a pretty well done AI fake, but it was fake. And so we're seeing a lot of that stuff happening. And some of it has clear partisan reasons. It's to say that look, Joe Biden's left this little fake girl without any help and her puppy, and it's it's flat out wrong, and it's disturbing, and just it reminds me of, frankly, of the early days of the pandemic, which I think people have kind of blacked out a little bit, myself included. But in those early days when we were trying to get information about this thing that was killing people, Donald Trump was president, and there was an incredible amount of misinformation from him and the people around him about the virus that was, frankly, killing people. And so to me, I see parallels there. Like, this is what happened. Donald Trump has a history in tragedies and in disasters of not making the situation better. In fact, of exacerbating it, of trying to use a disaster for political gains. And anybody who was out in Puerto Rico when he delayed aid to Puerto Rico after a hurricane can tell you this as well. Like, this guy has no record of standing up for people when they are in their worst possible situation. He has a record of doing the opposite. And I think people are seeing that.
He's such a liar, Billy. I hear in my head, how he says about the war in Ukraine, it never would have happened if I was president. He's such a liar and such an egotist, and he, after all, did, as we know, change the path of a hurricane when he was in office. I'm sure he says to himself, if I was president, this hurricane wouldn't have happened. It's maddeningly delusional.
We had to do some misinformation debunking yesterday, and this sounds goofy. What I'm about to say sounds ridiculous. Like, we couldn't possibly have to do this in journalism, but we had to do some fact checking because Marjorie Taylor Greene and other folks were sharing this frankly insane idea that Democrats had some way of controlling the weather, that they were using some sort of machine in order to send a hurricane into red areas. I'm not kidding. Like, if your reaction is that's ludicrous and you're going to laugh at it, yeah, that's appropriate, but it has serious consequences. And we had to do a video yesterday at Cardinal Pine saying, listen, that doesn't exist. No one has a machine. When I get off here, I am going to go
right on Cardinal on Pine's site and see that. They said, just to help me understand, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others said Democrats were controlling the weather in order to, make it harder for Republicans to vote by causing chaos?
She has implied this before, and she was responding a couple of days ago. I think it was on X, which is the place where all the misinformation thrives. It thrives in a lot of places, but really Elon Musk has encouraged it there. This idea was out there. We actually had to make a video and say, no, Democrats don't have a machine that controls the weather and sends hurricanes into Republican areas. And
oh my God. Was it a Jewish space laser? I can't believe we had to was it one of her Jewish space lasers that she thinks they were using? And they're just mad.
It's wild. It is just wild. And our reporter was saying, hey, this is ringing a bell. And he actually found, because I love our reporter for having this in his memory. There was an old G.I. Joe cartoon in the 80s where the Cobra King Cobra commander was using a device just like that in D.C. And it was like, this is a cartoon, not a documentary.
Wow.
We have to say that. And this is, I can't believe we have to do this, but it's
thank goodness you're there. Thank goodness you're there and able to do it. Listen, in the little time we have left, how can people help? What can people, up here in the Great Lakes region, what can people who care do to help folks in Western North Carolina?
Here's what I would recommend: going to a credible news site in this state, whether it's NPR, whether it's News and Observer, Cardinal Pine. We have a list on our site as well. Here's how to get help, and here's how to help. These organizations, if you find a credible news organization, most of them have done it, and they have brought their paywalls down to their credit. Cardinal Pine will never have a paywall, but these folks, the for-profit folks, are also bringing down their paywalls, and they have lists up there of vetted organizations that you can contribute to that can help, whether it's the American Red Cross. North Carolina also has a disaster relief fund that you can contribute to that is going directly to the organizations bringing water and food and medical supplies there. You can donate money to them. And there are, like I said, a number of organizations on the ground that are getting food out there and water and supplies. And so, like I said, I would go check them out, the American Red Cross, find a list from a trusted news organization about the organizations that you can contribute to, because I think that's what you can do. And also you can stop spreading lies if you're a part of it. Let me say that too. If you're out there enabling misinformation, you've got to stop. Please stop. It's hurting people, and it's not helping anyone. And quite frankly, on the ground in Western North Carolina, there are people helping people, and none of them are asking, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat before I help you? No one's doing that, because that's not how people act. And see this for what it is, which is a humanitarian crisis and not a political advantage for any one side or the other.
Yeah, and as you say, it's also having nothing to do with government, an example of humans helping each other that's beautiful.
It's, I wish that we had more time just to tell those stories about it. And we're going to tell more of those at Cardinal Pine, because that's the important thing. There's some lies that you can let sit there and you try not to give them air by even pushing back against them. But some were so big and so harmful that you have to fight them. And that's what we've had to do. And not just us, but a lot of news organizations have worked very hard to push back against this misinformation. And you have to give credit to the local officials. I don't care what the partisan affiliation is. There are people on the ground here in North Carolina who are doing the right thing and who are saying the right thing to try to help their community. And, clearly they're not on Donald Trump's speed dial, because I'm sure they would have a lot of things to say to him if they were.
Well, that's going to be our last word. Listen, thank you for taking the time. I know you're, I was going to say swamped, but that's terrible. There's a ton of work that has to be done, so I'm grateful that you take the time to share with us up here some of the things that you're seeing. And I'm speaking for all of the Great Lakes region. Our heart's with you and with the folks in Western North Carolina.
I'm always happy to be here, Edwin, and thank you to all our friends up there in the Midwest. We appreciate y'all.
All right, take care.
Take care, Edwin. Bye now.
Bye. Right, we are going to take another break, and when we come back, fabulous Charlotte Clymer's joining me.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Little after 2:30 here in the upper Midwest, and I am happy to be joined again by Charlotte Clymer. She is Of course, a veteran, a Texan by birth and attitude, trans woman, and the politically savvy author of Charlotte's Web Thoughts. Charlotte, thank you for joining me again. Okay, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. It's good to be back with you again.
Well, we have a lot to catch up on. For too long, I guess let's start here, and against all evidence, the public has until like yesterday, trusted Donald Trump on the economy. But now, finally, and I mean like yesterday, it looks like their confidence has shifted, and Kamala Harris is getting better marks on things like who can better handle inflation. I guess, and this is something that you've written about, I've talked about. It's so hard for reality to sink in, but it looks like doing the job well actually matters after all.
That's absolutely right. I mean, over the past 8 years, we have really seen two versions of reality. And, one of them is, I would say, built on a lot of bad faith. It panders to people's fears. It's mainly propagated through social media nonsense and a lot of right-wing bad faith in the blogosphere. And then you have the actual reality, which is that, this has been arguably the greatest economic recovery in modern history. President Biden and Vice President Harris have really stood in the breach for all of us. The fact that the unemployment rate is now down to 4.1%, which is, the best level in quite some time. The fact that, as you said, manufacturing jobs are up, inflation is cooling down. It really has been extraordinary. And this is after a pandemic that completely throttled the U.S. economy just 4 years ago. I mean, we really have a lot of, I would say, performance to thank in the absolute determination of President Biden and Vice President Harris to really deliver for all of us.
Yeah, bragging rights.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. A lot of bragging rights.
Right. But it took a long time for the public to sort of give the credit where it belongs, but belatedly, but maybe just in time, that's starting to happen.
Yeah, I'm thinking this for that. I mean, it feels like Democrats, and I think I mentioned this to you last time when we talked, it always feels like Democrats are forced to essentially fight with one hand tied behind our backs. Because so often there is a tendency in much of political media to operate in this infuriating both sides nonsense, right?
Oh, absolutely right. They've equated truth with lies for, now 8 some years, and it's absolutely damaging to the entire nation.
That's right. And, thank goodness that we have a presidential ticket with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, who are so effective in getting the message out to voters. This would not be happening right now. This, I would say, as you eloquently put it, the fact that, we are now seeing more of the American public recognize reality when it comes to economic performance. That would not be happening right now if Vice President Harris and Governor Walz were not such effective communicators.
Yeah, they've been very good. I mean, look, we Democrats don't want to leave anybody behind. So we don't say Joe Biden should get a Nobel Prize. We should put him and Kamala Harris on Mount Rushmore for what they've done. You can bet if the Republicans had half the economy we have, they'd be screaming that should happen.
Oh, yeah. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Trump himself has argued that he should be on Mount Rushmore.
Yes, and his team wants to put him on a new, I think, $5,000 bill or something to debate that in Congress. Boy, that's really worth our time.
Yeah. Oh, good Lord.
Well, look, now we're at this point where, well past its due date, we might actually elect a woman president. It's not even controversial anymore. It's just delayed. But the Republicans, not the Democrats, who are going to elect a first woman president, the Republicans are playing the gender card. And they're doing it in a way, Charlotte, I don't understand. And I've been thinking a lot about this since the GOP convention. They have some crazy and flawed and strange ideas about manhood. You know, it involves like dressing a certain way and adopting a sort of weird swagger and drinking a cocktail I like to call the Mar-a-Lago because it's 20% cruelty and 80% lies. And I just don't like, I don't define manhood like that. I don't understand why they think it's all about beating somebody down.
It's about insecurity. It's about alleviating their own insecurity. That's what it's about. You know, I have a lot of friends in my life who are quite masculine men, you know, having served in the military. You know, I know men who are U.S. Army Rangers, a couple Navy SEALs. These are men who do not feel the need to constantly have to prove their manhood.
No.
They don't buy into that nonsense, and they are so strong and comfortable in their skin that it would never cross their minds that they need to somehow play this weird code switching, not code switching, but code enabling game of you know, buying into all this nonsense. It's ridiculous.
Ridiculous and dangerous and pathetic. And I wonder whether we're going to, that the country's going to wake up from this and just go, ugh, yuck.
I hope so, you know, but I'll be honest with you, sir. I think it's going to, you know, be a lingering effect for quite some time. You know, we are really, when it comes to gender performance, in a ongoing war of attrition. It is going to take a lot of consistency and effort to convince people that this very weird and strange and needless debate over, you know, what it means to be manly is an enormous distraction from what should be important, which is helping people, making sure no one gets left behind, giving folks the freedom to be themselves, regardless of what that means. You know, I told folks a lot, you know, being a trans woman, if I ever had a kid, I had this one conservative person years ago ask me, well, you know, let's say you had a son and he wanted to, you know, play with fire trucks and do contact sports or whatever, you know, would you feel offended by that? I'm like, why would I feel offended by that? That's what the kid wants. So dumb. You know, if I had a son who wanted to be, you know, like a real boy's boy and just, you know, be himself and comfortable with his own skin, why would that bother me? And for some reason, though, Republicans, so many Republicans, not all Republicans, but so many of them have this bizarre desire to make sure that everyone around them is performing gender in exactly the way they are. And where this comes from is an insecurity. It comes from a deep-seated insecurity that if they don't see everyone else doing the same thing they are, they start to feel insecure about what they're doing. It's tragic.
Well, and the other cost, I mean, we talked about their views on manhood, but the other cost is it makes them have insane views about women, including they shouldn't have any choices.
Oh, my God. I mean, look at Vance. Look at J.D. Vance and the litany of just completely ridiculous statements that have come to be more revealed over the past 6 months. The fact that he has said he's concerned if one of the public school teachers, like if a woman who were a public school teacher didn't have kids, that he would feel very uncomfortable with that. Like, why is this man so obsessed with whether or not women he doesn't know are pregnant or have children? It's so weird. It is just completely weird.
It's so weird. And it's just so repulsive. All right, let's have some fun on a different topic. Okay. A few weeks ago, you spoke, I think, elegantly with me here on this show about Mr. Trump's desecration of Arlington National Cemetery. And I was just in D.C. and, you know, I saw it on my way back to the airport. And of course, you see it and immediately you think a couple of things, but one of them is This used to be Robert E. Lee's plantation, also known as slave camp, and the Union seized it during the war, and afterwards they didn't give it back to him. They dedicated it to the soldiers who gave so much in the cause of freedom. I have visions, once we are done with Trumpism, that we will, that Mar-a-Lago will be forfeited and become a great museum to the power of ordinary people and democracy to overcome, the worst instincts of humanity. I mean, can you imagine? We could have an exhibit on John Roberts and the court taking away voting rights, and another on January 6th. We could devote a whole room to the 147 members of Congress who broke their oaths and voted to overturn the election. I mean, just think about how much, I look at those beautiful is the wrong word, those moving and educational museums in Berlin that talk about the Holocaust, that are like on the site of where the SS office used to be. I think we should do that to Mar-a-Lago.
I think that's a wonderful idea. It would be great if a bunch of private donors got together and decided to make Mar-a-Lago, I would say, an educational institution for the preservation of democracy. Really drilling down into civic education, reminding everyone of our nation's history, the good and the bad, really inspiring folks about what America could be if we make the effort to realize that future. I mean, I love that idea. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, sort of the seat of the effort to overturn the democracy could become a place where people go to learn how to preserve it and how to honor the voices from across our country. I mean, yours and thousands of others who have taken, to turn your life upside down, to take the time to warn everyone, to educate everyone, to encourage everyone not to take this dark road.
It's so interesting. I was at a fundraiser last night, and I gave a little speech, and it occurred to me that the last 8 years we had been living through history that we would rather not have lived through, quite frankly. But one thing that does give me hope, and this is the flip side of this coin, one thing that really does give me hope is that future generations are someday going to read about the history that we are about to make. And if that doesn't inspire us, if that doesn't give us just a little more motivation over this last month in this election, I don't know what else does. Someday, a lot of the folks who are listening to this right now, they are going to take their grandkids someday to the Kamala Harris Presidential Library. And they're going to walk through the exhibits, and their precocious grandkid is going to ask something like, do you remember this? I mean, do you remember this at all? And if we do everything we're supposed to do in this election, if we actually make the effort, we're going to be able to say, I don't just remember it, I was part of it. I was part of getting the first woman elected president. And not only that, I was part of the effort that made everything else that came after a reality. Recodifying Roe as a law of the land, passing the Equality Act, making sure that working class families aren't left behind, reforming our federal judiciary so that it better represents the American people and the proud history of, I would say, judicial fidelity. These are all things that are within our grasp. These are all things that could happen if we do everything we're supposed to do over the next month. We are making history. How many generations can say that? How many generations can actually say that they achieved a great chapter in American history? And we're about to do that.
Yeah, I think I've talked about it as the third birth of American freedom. And it's rare to live in a time when what you do actually matters. Not when what societies, but what you do, the choice you make. And everybody who lives in this country has this remarkable, not just opportunity, but obligation to put their hand on the scale of history. It's such a rare moment. It's terrifying, frankly, but it's so important. And I think we are lucky to live in a moment that matters, as frightening as it is. But what we create, as you say, they can go see it in the Kamala Harris Presidential Library or in the Mar-a-Lago, Center for Democracy. I mean, we ought to be able to. Oh, I'm going to say something dumb. We ought to be able to focus. It's not that hard after all this time for 30 more days.
It's not. And, I do want to say something else, too, about this. I imagine some of your listeners are hearing us be very optimistic at this moment. And they're like, what? Listen, don't count your chickens before they hatch and, don't think we've won this. No. That's not about that. This is not about a guaranteed victory. That's not what this means. Nothing is guaranteed. I think that there are a lot of people who, understandably, have considerable anxiety over this election because of what happened in 2016. And that's fair. That is right. And here's what I'll say. I'm glad you're anxious, because the difference between this year and 2016 is that anxiety is going to be what pushes us way over the top. It's going to be what gets us that resounding victory. Because there, quite frankly, was a little complacency. Well, maybe not a little, a lot complacency in 2016. But that's not the case now. So, I'm not here to alleviate anyone's anxiety. I'm saying you should be anxious. And you should let that motivate you to make the calls to voters, knock on doors, call your friends and family and neighbors and make sure they're registered to vote and that they're, voting in this election and doing everything they can so that on the morning of November 6th, they can look back and say, damn, I am so glad I did everything I could do, and that, now we're seeing history being made. Just because we were having some fun imagining a better future doesn't mean that you or me or anybody should think it's easy. I'm terrified about Pennsylvania. I'm very worried about Arizona. We need an overwhelming victory to get past the biases in the Electoral College. So you are right to throw some cold water on any fun having this early. We need to focus. But also enjoy the moment, because you're right. We should enjoy the moment.
Yep. I mean, I already voted. I voted yesterday, and I am thrilled that I was able to do that. And anybody listening, vote the moment you're able. And there's a reason for that. The campaigns are worried about every vote, and they don't know who you voted for. Nobody knows that. But you can see who voted. And once somebody sees you voted, they don't worry about you anymore. They go on to the next. So vote as soon as you have the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. I have always been pretty particular about voting on Election Day. There's just something magical about it. But this year it's different. If you have the capacity, make sure that you get your absentee ballot or that you go to your early voting poll station. Just get it knocked out of the way. Just be able to cross off the list so you don't have to worry about it. You have no idea what could happen on Election Day in your personal life. Maybe, if a relative gets sick, maybe, work gets so overwhelming that you can't tear yourself away, although it is legal, by the way, for you to take a few hours off to go vote in most job situations. But regardless, just get it knocked out. Just get it out of the way so you don't have to worry about it, so that you can say, I definitely voted. I know my vote was sent in, and it's going to be counted. I'm good to go.
And it feels so good. It feels so good to have voted in this election.
And think about also just the poetic circle around from an entire nation, an entire national history of people fighting and dying for the right to vote. And the fact that we are about to elect a woman who, for many different reasons, would not have been able to vote throughout most of our nation's history. That is so. There's just something so powerful about that. There is something galvanizing about that realization.
Yeah, and also somebody who, I mean, I guess this election was always going to be about, and has this fight that we are in has always been about whether we can create the first truly multiracial, multi-faith democracy with shared power, amongst all our people. It doesn't exist in the world. It never has. And it makes sense that America would be the first to do it. But it also makes sense that it was never going to be easy, that the forces that have always conspired against it would take a last stand. And so they are. But we might. And if we do, what a light to the world, because we look like the whole world here in the United States. And if we decide that together we're a democracy, the Chinese don't want to see that. The Russians don't want to see it. It is a affirming, individual affirming thing.
Can I tell you something? And I could not agree more with that. It reminded me of something that I wish that most folks knew. Once Kamala Harris takes the oath of office as the President of the United States, in the 24 hours after she takes that oath of office, there will be the same ritual that's played out across every U.S. government building around the world. Every military base, every diplomatic office, everywhere. And that is that a staffer in each one of these buildings is going to hang up a portrait of President Harris on their wall under President of the United States. And everywhere across the world, when people walk into this building, they're going to see that the United States of America is led by a Black and South Asian woman. And let me tell you something. Whether or not these are folks who don't know a lot about the United States and might walk into a government building and see that, or it's a U.S. Army recruit at basic training who is, getting their first taste of what it means to be a public servant, and they see that portrait on the wall. There are so many people who are going to understand immediately what it means to be an American in this new era. And it's beautiful. That is such a beautiful thing to imagine and occurring after the oath of office is taken.
And the other option is an unthinkable and ugly thing, that we rehang Donald Trump's scowling face for him to be the untethered from the law, unaccountable because the Supreme Court said no one can hold him account, tyrant that he would be. Yeah,
and that's a scenario that, by the way, I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're going to do everything we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen. We're in a great spot right now. We're in a great position. But if that does happen, if that were to occur, it really chills my spine to think of what happens next. And we need to let that drive us. We need to let that I would say healthy anxiety to drive us into action over this last month. We need to make sure every single day counts.
Yes, and I'm afraid we are not done after we vote, because they've been lying and lying and lying about the legitimacy of our elections, claiming that millions of people who have no right to vote are voting, that we've somehow taken money away from the effort to protect the people in rural western North Carolina in order to somehow find room for people who shouldn't be allowed to vote in order to taint the election. None of that's true, and the reason they're doing it is so that after they lose, they can try to do what they did again 4 years ago. And Charlotte, I just want to say that we, Democrats, We owe it. Last time a lot of people went to jail because they believed Donald Trump, and they did this terrible thing on January 6th. This time we need to tell them in advance. If you dare, you will be in jail. You will never see your children. This is an error, and you will not go unanswered. They need to understand that up front this time.
There are consequences for our actions, and it doesn't matter if it's someone on the extreme left or the extreme right. Any person who threatens or carries out a threat against the United States government and tries to overturn an election, they should face the consequences. And it's simple as that.
Simple as that. Well, we're out of time. I can't believe it.
I know. Our conversations go so quickly.
I got distracted. Listen, I love talking to you. We need to do it again. I know we're voting. So the only counsel like mine is follow everything you heard Charlotte said and pay no attention to any story in the news for the next 30 days because you already know everything you need to know, and it's likely to be a lie what you see in the news in the next 30 days. So go vote, get your friends to vote, get their friends to vote, wrap your arms around each other, and do not be shaken.
Yeah, no, we got this, y'all. We got this. Now just do the hard work, and we are going to win. There is no doubt in my mind.
Thank you. We will talk again.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
You bet. Okay. All right, everybody, I'm going to take a break for the news, and then when we come back, I wanted to have another conversation with the Guardian's Sam Levine about the state of elections and voter suppression now that the vote is actually happening. I recorded that conversation yesterday before I actually cast my ballot, but I was staring at it through the whole conversation. And Sam, as usual, is thorough, careful, really smart. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be back right after the news.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
For a while, know that the Guardian's have been doing incredible and important work covering voting rights and elections and the concerted, organized, comprehensive efforts. You may have also noticed that his appearances on our show have become more frequent as we approach the election. There's a reason.
This Halloween orange pumpkin.
There are so many important questions to answer as you make choices in any election. But once that's done and voting is underway, really only one remains. Will our votes matter? Will we be allowed to vote? Will our votes be counted? Will the results be certified? Will Congress do its ministerial job without interruption this time? Will Americans abide by the results? No one has spent the last, 5 years digging into this as much as Sam, so we're lucky to have him back. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Edwin. Thanks so much for having me again.
Well, the election is now underway. Absentee ballots are in the mail, and that sound you hear is mine. I received mine yesterday, and I will complete it today and get it back. Early voting has begun in some states, but efforts to undermine voting have not slowed down. Do you want to talk about that?
That's right. I mean, people talk about Election Day, but the election is already well underway. And, after the 2020 election, there were significant efforts to curtail specifically mail-in voting, which Americans used in record numbers in 2020. So we saw states do things like shorten the window to request an absentee ballot, shorten the window to return one. So the deadlines are a little bit tighter this year.
Sam, we talked about this, I think just a couple of weeks ago, but Dems have now sued Georgia's state election board. Can you tell us about their case and whether or not it can be resolved in a timely manner?
Well, the Georgia State Election Board, which is an unelected 5-person board in Georgia, has passed through a suite of very aggressive last-minute rule changes. Those changes have included giving local election officials more discretion over whether to certify election results. And most recently, they passed a rule that requires local election workers to hand count ballots at the precinct. They're not actually counting the votes. They're making sure that the number of ballots matches up with the number of ballots that the machine recorded. And Democrats sued them over that this week. Sorry, I think it was last week. Democrats sued them over that last week for a few reasons. First, they said that the board has exceeded its authority. This is a board that is charged with promulgating rules to enforce Georgia statutes, but there's nothing in Georgia law that requires a hand count. So the board has said that it is going. So Democrats have said that the board went far beyond its authority. The second thing is that Democrats say that this is going to create chaos and confusion. It's not going to lead to an orderly election, and the board is charged with promulgating an orderly election. So that lawsuit was just filed last week, and I think we're going to get a fairly quick ruling on that in the courts in Georgia.
Well, that's good news, I think. But so Georgia's a swing state, really important for the outcome of the election. I want to turn for a second to Alabama, which nobody thinks is a swing state. And yet. So folks in Alabama are being told, hey, you're not citizens, you're not allowed to vote. But it turns out that there plenty of citizens are being told that. Will you talk about what's going on in Alabama?
Earlier this summer, the Secretary of State of Alabama sent out a notice to about 3,600 voters saying, we believe you're not a U.S. citizen and that you have to prove your citizenship if you want to vote. The Secretary put every voter who is flagged in something called inactive status, which is a very aggressive move. It essentially means that the voter has to take additional steps if they want to vote a regular ballot in November. And civil rights groups, the Justice Department, sued Alabama over this action, saying that it violates a requirement that states can't undertake any systematic action within 90 days of the election to remove voters. And the Justice Department in its filing said that actually a significant number of voters have since contacted the Alabama Secretary of State and said that they are in fact citizens. I think it's something like more than 700 voters, so 700 out of about 3,600. That's an astoundingly high error rate. That means that Alabama was wrong about 1 in 4 people that it flagged on the. Let me say that again. That's an astoundingly high error rate for Alabama. It means that the state was wrong about 1 in 4 voters with the potential to go higher. And, it's just astounding for the state to be asking eligible voters to prove their citizenship in order to vote. The bigger picture is that this effort in Alabama is part of a national effort by Republicans to suggest that there are non-citizens voting in our elections, and this is the consequence of that kind of lie taking root in the states.
Yeah, I was going to go there, and you got ahead of me. So in Alabama, voters up here, citizens up here in the upper Midwest, which is where most of the people listening to the show are, they don't think about Alabama as a swing state. They care that everybody should be allowed to vote. But it comes as a puzzle why the leaders in Alabama would make it harder for people in that state to vote, throwing legitimate voters off the rolls in that state, when really there isn't a single Republican in jeopardy of losing an election in Alabama. And yet they're doing it for the reason that you just started to talk about, which is to lay the groundwork to undermine elections everywhere. And I think you've written a lot about that. So let's talk about that. I can talk about that later, but let's talk about that right now. So it's part of this national effort. Say more about that.
Well, this idea that there are non-citizens voting in election is something that's been disproven and debunked many, many times. Not only is it already illegal, but there have been several studies, investigations that have found that, when it does occur, it's isolated, it's very, very small. And Republicans in recent months have really started leaning into this again, and they've done things like they passed a bill in Congress to require proof of citizenship. It passed the U.S. House, but it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. President Trump has started saying it on the campaign trail over and over again. Secretaries of State in Alabama and elsewhere have sent out notices to voters and loudly publicized their efforts to say we believe we have non-citizens on the voter rolls, but the methodology that they're using is extremely unreliable. And the Republican National Committee has filed a number of lawsuits in several states accusing officials of not properly policing their voter rolls. So, when you take all that together, it's a very aggressive effort to create this impression that there's something amiss in American elections and that they're vulnerable to non-citizens voting. And this is a strategy that dovetails really strongly with other Republican issues, concerns about the border. And it also comes at a moment when we know that the demographics of the United States are changing significantly. This is a country that is, already on pace to become majority non-white, and there's considerable cultural anxiety about that. So all of that combined with, the already escalating rhetoric about voter fraud is all creating this perfect storm for Republicans to seize on this issue. And it seems to be a very, very clear effort to seed doubt about the election, and is something that if Donald Trump loses in November, that I think Republicans are going to return to claim that something was amiss in the election.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to ask you how predicting the future is, I know, a dangerous game. But everything you've seen leads you to this place where you just said, should Donald Trump lose, we should expect him not to accept the results. We should expect them to claim that the vote is illegitimate and that he won. Is that really what you're telling me?
I mean, I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that Donald Trump will accept the results of the election. He's been asked multiple times, including at the debate, and he has refused to say that. J.D. Vance was asked about that at the debate this week, and he took a pass on it. So I really don't see any suggestion that Donald Trump will accept any election result that's not a victory for him.
Yeah. So across the country, local governments are fortifying their election facilities. They're erecting bollards and protections in anticipating post-voting chaos. Do you think this is warranted? Is that a prudent thing to do, or is that overkill?
Well, I think there's good reason for election officials to be doing that. They saw what happened in 2020. I mean, you just looked at the images of ballot counting at the TCF Center in Detroit or at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. We know from a filing from Jack Smith this week that the Trump campaign was encouraging people to be disruptive at the TCF Center in Detroit. And over the last 4 years, election officials have dealt with a wave of threats, harassment, angry people who are upset about the election, and they're taking extraordinary steps to protect their facilities and to protect themselves, anticipating that the same thing is going to happen in 2024. So yes, I do think those are justified steps.
And you just talked about folks being harassed around the country. Are there good examples of that you can tell where election officials are harassed? I think somebody was wearing an Ask Me How to Vote T-shirt and got chased out of a grocery store. Do you know people some examples of that?
Well, there have been, numerous examples, and, there was a story this week in the Christian Science Monitor about an election official in Georgia who was wearing an Ask Me How to Vote T-shirt in the grocery store, and someone came up to her and started harassing her. There have been numerous examples of officials reporting death threats to the Justice Department. And in Lucerne County, Pennsylvania, they just announced that they're going to fortify their election office by putting boulders outside of the office to prevent someone from, driving into the building or something like that. There's just numerous examples over the last 4 years of election officials being harassed. Many have left the profession altogether, and I think that, again, it's something that we're going to see more of this year.
And all of this stems from a pattern and a repeated pattern of lies that are being told to the American people. Lies about non-citizen voting, I guess lies about Asian residents in an Ohio town eating pets. You spent some time talking about what we can do to counter these lies. You wrote about, I guess, the limitations of our defamation laws. What did it cost Fox and Newsmax, or whatever the name of that propaganda organization is, for their lies? How did it stop them? And did the guilty verdicts or the penalties they paid impact, the public's view about the truth? Talk about what you found.
Well, after there were a wave of lies after the 2020 election, a number of individuals, voting machine companies, took action through civil litigation, through defamation lawsuits, to hold those that spread the lies accountable. Companies like Dominion Voting Systems, Smartmatic, which is a much smaller voting equipment company, sued Fox, Newsmax, OAN, all networks that played a critical role in spreading this misinformation. And what we've seen is that a number of those lawsuits have settled pre-trial. The Fox Dominion settlement famously resulted in a $787.5 million payout for Dominion. The Newsmax case, it was a case between Newsmax and Smartmatic, settled right before trial with confidential terms. OAN has also settled litigation. They've apologized on air. And this is just one of the ways that people harmed by these lies have tried to seek some measure of accountability. But experts that I've spoken with have really warned against expecting these lawsuits to be a cure-all for misinformation. Libel law is an area of law that's meant to address a very specific issue, which is when one specific person or a company is reputationally harmed by something that someone knew was false. And that can be extremely difficult to prove. In the United States, there are reasons why that's difficult to prove, especially against a news organization. There are important First Amendment issues there. Just because these cases are settling, it isn't going to cure misinformation. And I think a lot of people look at these settlements and actually say, well, it could send the opposite message, that you can actually just get off the hook for lying if you agree to pay a certain amount of money. But what these settlements have done, but what these cases have done is, beyond the settlements, they've provided a look into the internal workings of these companies and have lent public insight into what news personalities and other people knew at the time that they were broadcasting these lies. And especially in the Fox case, it led to revelations that people like Tucker Carlson and other, key Fox hosts knew that the information that they were broadcasting about the 2020 election was false. And I think that's very valuable to have in the public record. But I don't think people should expect these cases to convince people about the 2020 election, to change people's minds. But I still think that they're important to have for the public record.
Let me talk about two cases you haven't mentioned because they're slightly different. One was, of course, Rudy Giuliani got sued by two election workers for the damage to their lives that he caused. And he did not prevail in his defense. And yet he has not yet been held. He has not yet felt the effects of the verdicts against him, and he hasn't stopped lying. Talk about that.
Well, this is a really interesting case. So two Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, sued Rudy Giuliani for spreading lies about them. They've, detailed publicly the vicious harassment that they faced after the 2020 election. After doing nothing wrong, they were just two, election employees in Fulton County. And last year, a jury in Washington, D.C. ordered Rudy Giuliani to pay nearly $150 million to them in damages. And on the one hand, you might look at that and say, that's a measure of justice, that these people are going to be compensated for the harm that they suffered. But this verdict really hasn't had any effect on Rudy Giuliani. He continued to defame them during the trial. I was there on the courthouse steps when he continued to repeat the lies that he had made about them, literally outside the courthouse as the trial was going on. And after the trial, Giuliani declared bankruptcy and has dragged these two women through bankruptcy proceedings to delay paying them any money. And to this day, he still has not paid out, what he was ordered to pay them. So on the other hand, I think you could look at this case and say it did lead to some level of justice against Rudy Giuliani, but it hasn't really resulted in any consequences for him. So, that continues to play out. The two women are not letting up. Their lawyers who are from Protect Democracy, which is a nonprofit organization that's been very committed to fighting against these election lies. Those lawyers have said that they will go after Rudy Giuliani until the end, ensuring that he cannot escape accountability for his lying. So I think that's something that we're going to see continue to play out over the next year.
One other case, Donald Trump was convicted by a jury of libeling a woman that the judge says he raped. Then he was also found liable for sexual assault. Notwithstanding that finding, notwithstanding that he had to pay, he hasn't yet paid because he's appealing, but that he was fined an incredibly large amount of money, at least to me it seems like a large amount of money, for those libels and for that assault, he continues to repeat the lies. So it goes to the effectiveness of we do not seem to have the tools as a society to stop someone from lying and slandering.
That's right. I think when a lie is out there and when it comes from someone who has a considerable public following, it's very, very difficult to persuade people that it was untrue or that this person lied. And, unless that figure takes some form of accountability, these lies continue to exist. And Donald Trump, of course, has refused to concede anything about the 2020 election. He's refused to concede anything in the E. Jean Carroll case, which is the defamation case you just mentioned. and so his supporters continue to support him. So I think we're really seeing the limits of defamation suits, libel suits, as tools for correcting misinformation.
All right, So just at this point in our conversation, I want to recap the things we've covered, because taken together, it's a terrifying story. We said, look, there is an ongoing, organized, multi-state campaign of lies. And many lies, but one in particular, that the election results can't be trusted because the people who are casting ballots aren't entitled to cast them. Two, that the lies have led to attacks on election workers, to violence, and to laying the groundwork for claims that the election itself doesn't count. Three, that we have every reason to expect Mr. Trump post-election to say the election didn't count and that he is the actual president. Four, that we expect, because of his lies, that a large part of the public will rally to his side because of those lies. And I guess lastly, we haven't the capacity through courts to stop anybody from telling those lies. That's a pretty grim place, Sam.
It's a very frightening place to be in. I think, the key thing is that the thing that does hold, and the thing that absolutely, will result in some accountability and that won't be overturned, is the vote itself. And, I think for all of the concerns, about Trump's effort to undermine the vote, there's still a lot of confidence that, the rightful winner of this election is going to be seated as president of the United States in January. And I think, taking a look back at the last 4 years, that, it was always the sense that, the ultimate measure of accountability, wasn't going to come from the courts. It was going to come from the ballot box, and, voters will have their say. As we talked about, they're already voting. And, the election is the ultimate measure of accountability.
The only measure of accountability, apparently.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to change subjects a little bit. I'm looking at my ballot, and it is such a privilege. It says to me, it's looking right back at me, and it's saying, look, I'm not just part of a great nation, but I have an obligation to its future. Because when I vote, I'm not just opining about our present circumstances. I'm joining with my neighbors and my fellow citizens to build a future together, to choose a future together. But I hear rhetoric like when Mr. Trump says to evangelicals, you'll never have to vote again. In that rhetoric, I hear a very different idea about democracy. In that view, America is made up of their club and everyone else. And we are in a battle where one side will win and the other side will be destroyed. And for them, that is the only question history poses for America. The only question, will we prevail over everyone else? And when that's solved, well, then there's no reason for anybody to vote anymore. Sam, I think that's insane. But I also understand how we got there, the decades of lies. And not just the ones you and I have talked about from Trump, but lies that go way back, whether that's about Hillary Clinton and pizzas, or about the party generally on every divisive social issue, or, my God, from Phyllis Schlafly to Fox Cable to Lee Atwater's shameful use of Willie Horton to Donald Trump saying if he loses, it's the fault of the Jews. This ugly streak is as old as our nation itself, but we've always overcome it. And for me, Sam, overcoming it is the reason why we are an exceptional nation. It defines us as an exceptional nation more than anything else does. But this time, these guys have translated those lies into laws that limit how people can vote. It's like a modern Jim Crow wrapping its long fingers around our electoral system. And so I know I've asked you this before, and I know you just talked about it a minute ago, but I want to go into more detail, because now that voting is underway, how do you know, other than faith, that the results will truly affect the will of the people?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First is that there are laws on the books in every state that make it very clear that, absent concrete, proven evidence in a court of law, that, the results of the election are going to be certified. The person with the most votes is going to win. And, I think part of this is setting expectations for, potentially a long vote count. Part of this is clarifying what it means when someone files a lawsuit to challenge election results. Those are just allegations. But there is little doubt that any state in the country is going to be able to overturn the valid results of the election. It's just not going to happen. So that I think is something that people should be very, very confident in.
I'm very happy to hear that. But in a really close election, they need all the people who are allowed to vote to be allowed to vote. And we're certainly saying that some people have to take extraordinary efforts to be allowed to vote.
That's right. And I mean, I think, it's harder than it should be in a lot of places to vote. But, I think one thing that's really encouraging is we are seeing people who are engaged, and we are seeing, a high turnout, people come out to vote. So that should give people a little bit of faith too.
Sam, as always, this is really powerful, helpful. Your reporting is so important. And boy, I look forward to talking to you after the election when there wasn't a single disruption and people accepted the results, and we put this in the history book that you will undoubtedly write for generations to read. I'm grateful, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin. Anytime.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All righty, Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin. I think what everybody's ignoring is the supernatural appeal of this candidate. That's what's unique about him. And he's in Butler, Pennsylvania today with his hands full of the Almighty, saying that the Almighty saved him from the assassination, it only gives him a bump. And that's what unique about this. What a person to pick for your supernatural hero is this gentleman. But if I could, I'm just going back to my philosophy class 50 years ago, and I thought of Nietzsche when he describes the Superman who can ignore all conventions, all laws, and bend the world to his will. Now, you can take your choice between those two, but apparently he's embodied both of these attributes. And when you hear the Republican stations, they all ended in prayer. You saw Vance, he made two references, one to Christ, and at the end it sounded like a eulogy at a funeral. And when you listen to the Republican stations, they're invoking God at the end of their broadcast. So they apparently feel that this man has some spiritual nature that appeals to him. And the Supreme Court in the same way. They feel that he was an agent of God who repealed Roe versus Wade. But this is unique in this election. And I hope we get over this, because when you give these attributes to people that don't, it's just ridiculous. When you look at the history of the United States, anyway, I'm buoyed by Wisconsin. They're up by 4 points. I think North Carolina we can grab. Pennsylvania we should squeak out. What do you think, Edwin?
I think first,
before we end up with a complete maniac, Go ahead.
This notion of false prophets, of which you speak, is
right.
It's newish in America. It's certainly not new in the history of the world, and we've been warned of it for thousands of years, including in the book they like to quote all the time. There's a passage. Oh my God, I'm going to have to find it. There's a passage in John.
That's right. Yeah, but it's unique in an American politician. I mean, you've had the silent majority back in Reagan, but this guy embodies it. I mean, he's out there with his hands tucked to Almighty God, and the bullet didn't kill him because Almighty God shielded him from the bullet, and his followers believe it. And they believe that God
some do, for sure.
His agent. Yeah.
Some do.
There's no question
Absolutely
about it.
Right.
Well, they couldn't vote him rationally. They couldn't vote for him rationally. How could they rationally vote for this guy? He's and his Supreme Court Court's laid a ground rule for him to become absolutely lawless, completely lawless. He's a Nietzsche character, the Supreme Court. He can do whatever his will demands. Anyway, it's a very weird still. Yeah, well, but it's interesting that we come to that point. Anyway, you have a great weekend, and I'm confident, but still, it's, when you hear these other people, oh, my God, because it is one of those elections. It is, oh, my God, who needs this lunatic? Anyway, thanks.
The stakes are too high. Thank you, as always. Brian, you're next.
Good afternoon, Edwin. Hope you're doing well. I'm calling to say that I voted already for Kamala, and I think anybody. I can't believe anybody would vote for someone with a trickle-down economics who would vote for Trump, who wants to give Musk and people like that more tax cuts, and more trickle-down economics. And we've seen. I'm very happy that Vice President Kamala and even President Biden have been knocking trickle-down economics. Really the first time since around 1981 we heard such talk. And also I wanted to mention that I am somewhat concerned about that we don't have an all-out war with Iran and a further escalation in the Middle East than we already have. Your thoughts on that, Edwin?
On the Middle East, I join in being deeply worried about a war with Iran. Not that, Iran could cause us enormous damage. I don't think it could, but another forever war in the Middle East? Do we not learn? I mean, Iran is a really interesting nation, and they have been an enormous mischief maker in that part of the world. Their proxies are now being eliminated by Israel, but the human cost is unthinkable. And to add a war with Iran, I mean, there's no question Israel's going to respond. I mean, twice now Iran has sent piles of ballistic missiles towards their cities, and of course they're going to respond to that. And you would, and I would. But let's hope it is measured, and that's the end of it. And they can both say, yeah, we came to the brink, but, let's back off. And we have to remind our friends in Israel that there is to be had a peace with their Arab neighbors, not so much with Iran, but they have weakened all of the proxies, and they could have a peace with the Saudis and the Emiratis and all of their Arab neighbors. In a sort of unified political entity that stands up to Iran if they can find a deal with the Palestinians that would give them the dignity of a state. And I do not believe that is out of the question.
I agree. And do you remember in late 2019, Trump said that he said he was about to drop a nuclear bomb on Tehran, and then he said he changed his mind. Could you imagine? And he's saying, if he was, if that guy gets president again, your whole show is on that theme. We'd be in for a heap of trouble. But I'm very optimistic that it's going to be President Harris.
Well, Brian, you win the prize to be the first person who's called me who's voted. I mean, you and I, but you win, and I'm thrilled to hear it that you voted already, and it's in the bank. It matters greatly. So I hope you will spend time encouraging everybody you can to get their vote in as soon as they can.
That's what I've been doing, and I intend to continue on that. Thank you so much, Edwin, for taking my call, and you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. I'm at 773-763-9278 if you want to join the conversation. And let me, excuse me, let me back up. Remember how I began this show. Talked about the last 4 years. And it's crazy, right? Because we have an incumbent president. I think he's done a very good job. But most of the noise of the last 4 years has not been from the president or Kamala Harris as vice president. It's been from this bullhorn of nonsense that we got from Donald Trump and his Republican Party. Just think, seriously, and call me and tell me what you think. But they had control of Congress. What did they do? Now, I just want you to think about whether you can name me a single thing that, the Republicans have done with their control of Congress. When Democrats were in control, my gosh, the laws they passed, began to take on climate change, fixed the American economy, began to onshore enormous amounts of manufacturing. I heard J.D. Vance in that debate say, what Kamala Harris should do is onshore manufacturing, and she's had 4 years to do it. And why hasn't she? Well, you know what? She has. I mean, the investment in American manufacturing is at an all-time high. And if Democrats didn't do all the things they wanted to do in 4 years, well, that speaks to two things. It speaks to our ambition to do great things that take longer than 4 years. But it also speaks to the damage that we had to undo first. You remember what happened? We came in to office, Joe did, with an insurrection on the Capitol, with everyone staying away from each other because of the pandemic and our economy in shambles. And we built it back up and we got it to where we are today. And at that debate, J.D. Vance says, shame on you for not onshoring manufacturing. Well, we did, but we did other things too to clean up the mess you left. Economy was not great under Donald Trump. We had a manufacturing recession before the economy went completely into the tank. Seriously, crazy stuff, they say. Crazy stuff. And then, oh my gosh, this damage. And Billy Ball, the reporter from North Carolina that we had on, talked about the crazy lies. And everybody in the state knows their lies. And then he reminded me, and I forgot, that Donald Trump wouldn't give the money, and certainly what he did when Puerto Rico had a hurricane, that he can't protect anybody when bad things happen. When bad things happen, what does Donald Trump do? He blames somebody. He doesn't help anybody. He blames somebody. You want to get help because you had a hurricane? You think Donald Trump's going to do anything more than come down later for a press op and throw toilet paper around as he did in Puerto Rico? Or say, I'll give money to someone if they can find a way to, give me some back. Yeah, you know what? You give me a permit to put my hotel by that river, I'll give you federal disaster aid. That's the kind of thing you're in for if that man returns to the White House. Sickening. Sickening. I mean, I don't want to use the word evil. It's not really in my normal vocabulary, but if the shoe fits, and it fits, I mean, it really fits. One of the callers, Brian, was talking about Trump thinking of himself as some kind of a prophet, a god. I know that this is a trial for America's soul. I mean, and Donald Trump is a false prophet. He's a fraud. He's a rapist, a cheat, a liar. And now he's asking America to walk away from all that, we've stood for at home and abroad, all that it means for people everywhere who desire to be free. He says we can't listen to any voices but his. He told Fox Cable, for example, that they must not be allowed to broadcast words of those who disagree with him, including and especially Kamala Harris. He has urged civil strife, both politically and socially, telling his supporters to fight like hell against the lawful counting of votes, promising violence that will terrorize Americans into submission. And, this follows his attempt to terrorize immigrants, to steal their children. In his world, whether a citizen or a migrant, the only hope is submission. Are you kidding me? And then his hand-picked Supreme Court says he is above the law, and now he wants to be beyond elections as well. Evil. I know this isn't an evangelical show, but let's call it what it is. It's evil of biblical proportions. I mean, when Brian called in, he talked about this false prophet thing. I think I know it's the book of John. Just give me 1 second. I'm actually going to find it. Here it is. John 16. They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming when anyone who kills you will think they are offering a service to God. They will do such things because they have not known the Father or me. I've told you this so that when their time comes, you will remember that I warned you about them. They will kill you and think they are offering a service to God. Seriously? That's what's going on the other side. That's what's going on. And it can't be, it just can't be. We have to think about what we need to do. I mean, the only thing American about Mr. Trump's movement is that it is the enemy we have always overcome. And I say that word enemy carefully, only once did we have to overcome it militarily, and that was the Civil War. Most of the time, we overcome it peacefully. We do it at the ballot box. We do it through civil discussion. We can do that again. We must do it again. We must do it again. We must. So we are met, as we were in that first and second birth of American freedom, on a battlefield. Right? The first time it was the question of whether for the first time in history a free people can govern itself as opposed to being under the thumb of a king to shape an organized society because humans are too unruly. And that was what the world thought. And we had a birth of freedom when we threw off the monarchy in the late 1700s. People suffered, people died at Valley Forge and elsewhere to make that happen. And then in the Civil War, as Lincoln said, we had a new birth of freedom. This time we went further and we said, we really mean not just the part in the Constitution, but the part in the Declaration of Independence too, that all of us are created equal. It's so very important. It's so important. And then we reach this moment where that idea of Lincoln's, Lincoln said it and he kind of meant it, but women weren't allowed to vote. And then we had Jim Crow, which even though they had created these legal freedoms for black Americans, they got taken away in the South. It could be taken away again. They are being taken away again, courtesy of John Roberts and some of the governments in the South, but we don't have to let them this time. This third birth of freedom, this one that you can usher in, and it's only 30 more days of work to do it, is one that says everyone here, everyone, no matter where they came from, no matter what God they worship, no matter what they look like, no matter what history they bring, their voice counts. And if we want a policy passed, we sit down, we talk. They have ideas. We have ideas. You negotiate. You learn from each other. Sometimes you compete with each other, but we set rules so that we can do it peacefully and move forward together. That's the miracle of America. That's what makes us exceptional. What doesn't make us exceptional is hate. What doesn't make us exceptional is this idea that it's, that we need some boss to tell us what to do. What doesn't make us exceptional is the idea that you only stand tall if you stand on the throats of somebody else. These are horrid ideas, and they're common across our planet. Donald Trump wants us to be just like that. Thugs. I think we're better than that. I think we are so much better than that. I think we have always, even in our darkest times, known that there was a promise to America that we stood for, that we were willing to fight for, that many amongst us not only were willing, but in fact died for. This notion that all of us together can somehow work with each other to move this country forward. Move forward in a way that benefits all of us who live here and ultimately all of us on this planet. Lots at stake. I've voted. Brian voted. I hope the rest of you will vote before next week. When we reach this moment next week and I ask you to call in, I want you to tell me you voted. That's it, folks. Have a great week. I will catch up with you again next week. Take care.